It is perhaps fitting that this is my 200th video for a couple of reasons. Not only because I am returning to my original format of just rambling at the camera and hoping to be able to turn the results into a usable video, but also because it might be my last video. But we'll get back to that later, as when telling a story one should start at the beginning. We moved to Boise about 20 years ago for work, in spite of not really being city kind of people. My employer had been offering work from home as part of an incentive program, which I had done as far back as 2006. But with the 2020 lockdown, it had become mandatory, and they started closing offices. It was about the same time that I started this channel, and that we started considering the idea that with permanent work from home, we could start looking for something outside of the city. About 12 years ago, we purchased a small single level on about half an acre on the outskirts of town that didn't really feel like living in the city at the time. We had a large empty field beside us and had to pass by a horse ranch and a cattle ranch to get to our house. Of course, in the time since then, those have all become subdivisions, and the city has expanded well beyond where we live. My wife has a habit of searching online for old fixer-uppers. There were, of course, restrictions on where we moved to, as far as my employment, such as having access to high-speed internet so I could do my job, and being within a regional contract area, which had us limited to 14 western states. Of course, most of the places the wife found did not meet one or both of these criteria, as most of them were on the East Coast. But eventually, she did find a place in South Dakota that did meet both of these criteria. Still a bit further away than we'd like to have moved, but property prices in Idaho itself had climbed to the point that finding something rural there was out of the question, or at least out of our price point. And the location of this house also happened to be in a small town that both her brother and sister had recently retired to. Not to mention having a 4-car garage. So we started looking into it, and it was less than 1,300 miles away. We initially ran into a few obstacles. In spite of my supervisor's assurances to the contrary, getting the approval for the move turned out to be problematic, which involved reaching out to local union representatives and supervisors and verifying that I could get access to facilities in the area if necessary due to some sort of prolonged internet access issue. But eventually those issues were resolved, and the house is a bit of a fixer-upper as expected. So we put a lowball bid in on the house, and they accepted it. The next problem was everything had to be set up at the new address before we moved to the new location so as not to interrupt my work, and one of us had to be there for closing. So the wife, in her stubbornness, decided that she would drive out to the new house with a truckload of our stuff to sign the closing papers and get everything set up, and I would follow later, as we intended to keep our old house and have one of our sons move into it, and he would take over making the payments. And so that the wife wouldn't be driving out alone, it was decided that her sisters that lived in that town would fly out and they would drive out together. So we rented a Penske truck, an International WT with a 26-foot box, filled it up with half of our stuff, and they headed out, one of them driving the truck and the other following in the wife's Malibu. They decided to take the southern route that they were both familiar with, as they had used most of it to get to Colorado to visit their father, except for turning north at the far side of Wyoming instead of south. But the brand new truck seemed to be having issues from the get-go, not being able to maintain highway speeds, particularly uphill, as it seemed to want to refuse to downshift, sometimes reducing their progress to 25 miles an hour on the interstate. And shortly after crossing the border from Utah to Wyoming, the car started making a rattling sound. So they decided it was time to take a pit stop and make a new plan, hitting the Penske dealership in Evanston, where it was determined that there was a computer problem that was preventing the truck from shifting properly, where they went out of their way to try to find a solution to the problem, including offering to pay movers to transfer everything into another truck. The problem was that the nearest other truck of that size was back in Boise, and it was a Saturday, meaning that Penske didn't operate on Sunday, so the soonest a replacement truck would be there would be Monday afternoon. Instead of hanging around for 2 days, they decided they would try to finish the trip, but because of the noise coming from the car, the rattling sound that they felt must be coming from the power steering pump, Penske set them up with a car trailer, and they made an effort to finish the trip. Oddly, with the extra weight behind the truck, it seemed to shift more reliably, and they were able to arrive at their destination Monday afternoon, sign the closing papers on Tuesday morning, and start moving in, where the neighbors they had never met assisted in the unloading of the truck, showing a return of small-town mentality. It was shortly after this that my employer announced that they would be surplusing a large number of employees. And having only been there 20 years, I was towards the bottom of the seniority list, so my employment was most likely in peril. So we decided to go ahead and put our old house up for sale, which meant doing a lot of cleanup and preparation for the sale and to move what was left, such as to make sure everything was ready to pass inspection, stripping down the parts car that we had sitting and hauling it off. For those in Magnum Mafia or others that might be interested, what remains of that car was hauled to TNT over by the airport. So if you need parts for a Dodge Magnum, that's where it is. Body panels are still on it and in good condition except for the tailgate. And we put our fish on Craigslist for free because putting fish in the back of a truck for a 2 or 3 day long trip, what didn't seem like a good idea. And I moved everything that I could that remained into the garage for easy loading. So after being separated for a month, the wife flew back out, and again, Penske did everything they could to help us get set up, where we rented 2 smaller trucks, GMC Vanduras with 16-foot boxes, each with its own car trailer, to haul both the Belvedere and the Crown Victoria. Crown Victoria, of course, is still not running, as I still haven't gotten around to completing the engine installation, but a local towing service came out and winched it onto the trailer for us. Our plan to leave that Friday ended up getting delayed because the house we had just put on the market sold, so we had to stick around and sign paperwork for a large part of the day instead of finishing loading the truck. So once again, we headed out on a Saturday morning. We decided to take a more northern route because it was supposed to be faster. Since we were going a route that we didn't know, we selected it on the GPS on the wife's phone with the intent of it keeping us on the freeway. Somewhere along the path, the phone recalculated us to a shorter route that ran us through Yellowstone Park, which may have been shorter and more scenic, but was certainly not the route that you wanted to go with 2 trucks hauling trailers. And it may or may not have taken any longer, but I'm sure we annoyed several tourists going through the park. And although we didn't stop to see any of the attractions and didn't see any buffalo in the park, the route kind of reminded me of the Little North Santiam River in Oregon. There was some confusion going through Bozeman, Montana, because the road signs kept telling us we needed to take a left to get back to the freeway, but the phone kept telling us we needed to go straight. As it turned out, the phone was the correct method, because going to the left would have taken us to I-90, but it would have been westbound, and we were eastbound. So if you're ever in that situation, follow the signs that say Livingston, and that will get you eastbound on I-90, which we initially did, spending the night in Billings and then finishing the trip on Sunday. The whole thing took us about 21 hours of actual driving time, or about 4 hours less than what the wife and her sister did taking the southern route in their slightly dysfunctional truck. And then a week later, we flew back to get the last of our stuff, which included the Magnum and the Dakota pickup. Of course, you can't fly directly from here to there. The nearest airport is 70 miles away, and it only goes to Denver and Chicago, which of course involved multiple gate changes and delays. So by the time we got back to Boise, even though we'd left here at like 7 o'clock in the morning, didn't get there until 3:30 in the afternoon. But we threw some last-minute stuff in the back of the vehicles and hit the road and managed to make it to Idaho Falls before we decided to call it a day. And our fresh start the next morning ran into 2 snags. First of all, the battery on the pickup was completely dead, didn't even get a click out of it, and the phone had decided that we were actually in Seattle. So finding an auto parts place near us started with directions on how to get the first 1,300 miles. I had thought I had my power pack stuffed behind the seat of the truck, but it turned out that that had been packed, and we didn't have any tools, so once I found an O'Reilly's nearby, I picked up a battery booster. I think I was due for a new one anyway, and we started the truck and it seemed to run fine. Although several hours later, when we stopped for gas, it still had no charge, so it wasn't charging. But we made it as far as Miles City without really any other hitch. So first thing the next morning, I found another O'Reilly's and we picked up a battery to see if that resolved the problem. And it seemed to. But since we didn't have reliable GPS on the phone, we were using the 20-year-old GPS in the Magnum, which instead of having us turn off the interstate in Miles City, had us stay on the interstate beyond Bismarck before heading south and going straight that direction, effectively losing the hour and a half we were supposed to save by taking that route. And then, while the wife was trying to wash bugs off the windscreen of the pickup, the windshield wipers stopped working. I believe because the plastic clip that connects to the motor under the cowl broke. But fortunately, we didn't hit any rain until about the last hour of the trip, and it wasn't terribly significant. So how do I like the new location? Well, as mentioned before, 4-car garage, and it's a much bigger house, and it's got some local automotive history. You may have noticed the 120-year-old carriage house behind me, which was built in 1907 by a pair of business partners that lived in this house and the house next door, which makes it associated with one of the first successful drives across the state, specifically from the Missouri River to the Black Hills in a 1903 Cadillac, as well as being associated with one of the first automobile distributors in the area, in this case Maxwell. And there is no place for a garden, but the wife's health has prevented her from working in our extensive garden at the old location, which meant it was almost entirely up to me to do the upkeep on that, which took me away from doing other projects. And although last season I had built a greenhouse there, we have 2 heated conservatories here, so the wife can still grow things to her heart's content. However, at the old address, we relied primarily on a landline, and the wife had a cell phone that we used for emergencies that was part of a family plan with her sister. But when we moved here, we were unable to get a landline because when they redid the siding, they cut all the inside wiring out, and when they built the 3-car garage, they cut and paved over the underground drop. So we opted to get our first personal senior cell phone account, which meant a new number for the wife. This is where the problems really come in, because as soon as I tried to log into my YouTube account once I got here, I was locked out for being at a different location, and they wanted to send a verification code to our now canceled cell phone number from the previous account. And after verifying my username and password, and having a verification code sent to the email on the account, and the backup email on the account, they still wanted to send a verification code to the phone number. An attempt to contact YouTube technical support sent me through an AI system that gave me a form for account recovery that did nothing but send me a link to reset my password. Fortunately, T-Mobile allowed us to reactivate the old phone number temporarily on the old account so we could get the Google account updated. But it's been a week since we've updated the account, and YouTube is still sending a verification code to the old number every time I try to log in. Which means this may very well be the last video that I'm able to upload to this account and may have to start over. So if you don't see any new videos uploaded after this week, you'll know why. And I presume, since I won't be able to access my account to make copyright claims against myself, I will be able to re-upload my content on a new channel if I have to create one. So whether I see you again in another week or not, or on a different channel, I want to thank all the supporters and all my subscribers, and wish you all a wonderful life.